Hello again, fellow audiophiles. I am Wave Theory, and today's review is the newest little piece of shit. Okay, this is the Schiit Multibit 2 digital to analog converter, which is Schiit's newest entry into their multi-bit DAC lineup, and it comes in at $299 US, which, if I'm not mistaken, makes it their least expensive multi-bit option in their DAC line. So this was part of a loaner chain going around to a bunch of different people, and it eventually landed here at my house, and it will be off to the next person very soon, so I don't get to hang on to it. Schiit does not know that I have it until they watch this video, and so they have made no attempt to influence my opinion one way or the other. So all of the thoughts you are about to hear are mine and mine alone. So let's do shameless self-promotion, and we'll come back on the other side and talk more about the Schiit Multibit 2. Hey, thanks for watching this video. Please remember to hit that like button, and if you haven't, please subscribe. Also, I have a Patreon set up so that you can help support me on a monthly basis, and I've set up a PayPal donation so that you can help me out in that way too if a monthly subscription does not make sense for you. Links for all of that, including the benefits, in the description below. Please check those out. All right, on with the show. All right, so the Multibit 2 here, again, comes in at $300 US. And I was really excited to get this piece in for a couple of reasons. For one, it is single-ended only in its output here. And in my humble and honestly correct opinion, there's a bit of a dearth of quality single-ended digital to analog converters under $1,000 in the market right now. The market is just really flooded with a bunch of balanced options. So I was really curious to kind of get this like lower mid-fi, call it like budget enthusiast tier kind of piece in here that is a single-ended only device, and to see how it performs, because there are a number of quality single-ended only headphone amps and speaker amps out there, particularly if you're talking about tube-based amplifiers in a similar price range that this can really could potentially really make sing. And the reason that I bring that point up is because, again, so many of the, especially DACs out there, from $200 to $1,000 anymore, are balanced, and they sound significantly better from their balanced outputs than they do their single-ended outputs. And I will touch on that again in this review as we get a little bit further here, because I compared this to a couple of higher tier DACs and their single-ended outputs to this one, and found some interesting results that I will report on in the course of this video too. So, does this fit the bill? Does this create a solid single-ended only option near the $300 price point to match with the plethora of headphone and speaker amps out there that are single-ended only? Let's dig in and find out. Okay, so specifications and unit tour. So the Multibit 2 here will process PCM signals up to 24-bit 192 kilohertz. There's no fancy decoding options beyond that. So no DSD, no MQA, right? Nothing of that nature there. So it's PCM or bust, basically, with this DAC. So keep that in mind. If you are the proud owner of a 500 SACD library, this may not be the piece that you are looking for. Now, it is built around some Analog Devices multi-bit chips, and you can get on Schiit's website, which I will link to down below, and read more about what that means, but the multi-bit architecture in here is built around some Analog Devices multi-bit chips. Schiit also includes a non-oversampling or NOS mode in this unit, which is accessible by pressing and holding the input selector button down here on the front for several seconds and then releasing it. When the input indicator lights slowly flash on and off, you're in NOS mode. When they stay on solid, they are in the oversampling mode, or just using Schiit's in-house digital filter, which I don't think they gave a fun name, or at least I didn't see a fun name given to it like they do their new Bifrost 2 DAC, which they call the Mega Combo Burrito. This one I don't know has a fun name for the digital filter, but there is a digital filter in there. Okay. So yeah, let's go ahead and do unit tour then. So this is the front panel. Okay, we have an input selector button. We get 3 LED indicators that indicate which input option you have selected. The input options, which we'll see in a moment, are USB, Toast-Link optical SPDIF, and coaxial SPDIF. Okay, that is the front panel. Done. All right, back panel. We have the DC power input. I will show you the power brick in a moment because I have a comment to make about it. We have the ever shitty power switch on the back of the unit here. And we have a USB-C input for the Unison USB connection in here. And I say Unison USB because Unison is Schiit's in-house USB solution. And honestly, it continues to be one of the best USB implementations in audio, especially in the entry-level kind of budget enthusiast and mid-fi tiers. Like, it's just a really solid USB implementation. So you get Unison USB here in a USB-C connector. Then we have the 2 SPDIF inputs, the Toast-Link optical and the RCA coaxial here, as I said earlier, and then we have the single-ended stereo analog RCA outputs right here. Okay, that's the build. The whole unit weighs about a pound, and I mean, you literally can hold it in the palm of your hand. It is not very big. It's a very small footprint. The power switch on the back does not bother me on a unit of this type. I would just switch it on and leave it on. For one thing, usually with multibit and R2R, because again, multibit is just kind of R2R or resistor ladder DAC on a chip. Okay, it is frequently better to leave them powered on just so they stay warm, because those kinds of DACs usually need a warm-up period, because the resistors that are used either on the multibit chip or in a discrete R2R setup are made to operate at certain temperature ranges, and so keeping them on and warm keeps them at their comfortable operating temperatures, and you don't experience a warm up or a ramp up to the performance you're supposed to get as the resistors warm. However, I will say in my testing on this particular unit, I really did not hear a whole lot of warm up time changes. Okay, so we can circle back around to that, but that's not a big deal on this particular unit to my ear. Okay, so anyway, for this kind of unit, the power switch on the back does not bother me, but I realize that that is going to offend some who are just philosophically opposed to that from the beginning. Okay, one of the reasons the unit can be this small is because it does not have an internal power supply. You get a power brick that comes with the unit here with a pretty standard DC power plug on the DAC end, and then the wall wart, right? Plugs into the wall. Now, this is a 16 volt, 1 amp output wall wart here. And honestly, I mean, it works. It does the job. I don't like that it is a wall wart style. I would like to see this transformer box here be in the middle of the power cord, where we have a more standard power cable coming out one end and then this cable coming out the other end. Like, for example, a competitor to Schiit, Monoprice, their liquid spark amp has one of those with the power brick in the middle of the cord, which I think is just much more ergonomic, much more user-friendly. So I would have liked to have seen that here rather than this power brick the way it is, because that just takes up so much space on your wall outlet or your power strip and all of that. So anyway, I just wish more manufacturers would move to the power brick in the middle of the cord rather than using it just plugged right into the wall wart style. Okay, so things like that. The power switches on the back, which again, not a huge deal with the Modi here, but like on the Schiit Lighter Plus, for example, like you burn through the tube life a lot quicker if you don't turn that unit off, but the power switch is on the back. So you got to reach your hand around a hot tube to get to that power switch and all of that. It's just, as a company, they don't quite go that extra mile in terms of creating a good user experience, in terms of interacting with their devices. And then they kind of laugh about it too. So while they tend to make very excellent sounding and otherwise well-built products, that's just something to keep in mind, is that when you get into the Schiit ecosystem, if you will, that there's just that last little bit of user-friendliness just isn't there. Okay? Again, the wall wart situation, the power switch on the back, those are just examples. Okay. So I think with that, having done the unit tour, it's pretty simple build, but I mean, it is rugged. We have this aluminum chassis here. It's pretty solid and all of that. And it's got a little bit more weight to it than you would expect, even though it only weighs about a pound. Okay, it just still has a nice heftier feel to it in the hand, I think. All right, so shall we get to sound? Yeah, let's get to sound. Test gear. I used this in a plethora of signal chains, so this is going to take a minute to get to. I would schlep this to my office at my real job, and I would sit at my desk there and listen to it, and the system that I would use there was my Microsoft Surface Pro 4 laptop tablet kind of PC running Audirvana, connected via USB-C using an Audio Quest Forest USB-C cable, okay, in here. And then this would in turn feed a Schiit's Asgard 3 headphone amp. And then if I was in a situation where I could keep my office door open, I would, or excuse me, if I could keep my office door closed, I'd use the open back Hi-Fi Men Sundara headphone, or, which I just did a review for, link in the description. Or if I had to keep the door open, I would use the closed back. Austrian Audio sent me their Hi X60 headphone, which is under review too. I would use that as well there in that office setting. Here at home, I plugged this into a huge range of stuff. Let's see. Amplifiers that this spent some time plugged into would be the single-ended inputs, obviously, of the Lake People G111 Mark II, the Violectric HPA V281, the iFi Pro iCan Signature Edition, and then because they only have single-ended inputs, the KN HA1A Mark II tube amp and the Erzatich Perfidus headphone amp, which I also very recently did a review for and will put a link to down in the description. Other headphones that I used here would be the Mastrop Sennheiser HD6XX, the Beyerdynamic DT880 600 ohm, the Hi-Fi Min HE1000 SE. I even tried the Susvara, and I tried the Focal Utopia, the original Utopia, okay, using this as a DAC as well. So it had lots of chances with lots of different signal chains, and definitely we scaled up with the amps and headphones using there just to really see what it could do. All right, so let's get into it then in terms of just the sound. The sound signature on this. Now again, you hook this up to an audio precision measurement box and it will measure flat in its frequency response from 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz. I am quite confident, okay? Perceptually, I think it has just a slight U shape in its perceptual frequency response. There is still that kind of fun bass presence that is common to the Schiit house sound. Yes, I know that sounds like Schiit house sound, okay? But like it has that trait. It also brings in a little bit of that added air that kind of came with their new, the Bifrost 2/64, how that one had a little bit more treble presence and air than the original Bifrost 2 did. Similar story here, I think. So it kind of creates a sort of a perceptual U-shaped frequency response, okay, in that way. Now, the presentation tends towards lively and dynamic, I think, especially with the digital filter, the in-house digital filter, meaning not the NOS mode, okay, active here, which is the default mode, okay. It's got a lot of, like, it is dynamic. It's got some good punch and some rumble in the low end to come with it. It's got some nice snap to it in, like, the mid-range with snare drums and all of that. But it also is just, like, it's energetic. It's lively. It's kind of almost, it's fun in that way in terms of how much energy it brings to the sound. Okay, so because of that, it does not come across as particularly smooth. It's a little bit more on the aggressive, kind of in-your-face sort of presentation. Now, also, the soundstage in here is wide, but it also feels a little bit closer to me. So it's a little bit closer to my head, all that in terms of its staging. So like the distance, the perceived distance from ears to where the first sound starts, like the first row of the symphony, if you will, starts, is a little bit closer than it is with most other DACs that I've heard. So that is just another way that my brain kind of interprets this as a little bit more forward, a little bit more energetic, a little bit more in your face, a little bit more fun and aggressive kind of presentation. Okay. So that's this thing's sound there on its own, in terms of just the frequency response in the presentation. Now, the resolution is pretty good. There's lots of nice texturing to the sound. The spatial presentation, again, we have a fairly large sound stage, even though it is a little bit closer to us. And there's reasonably good imaging and separation there. But I did notice that the sonic images tended to sound a little bit wider than a lot of competing DACs here, so they're a little bit closer to you, a little bit wider. They're still separated well, but they're not quite like the fine point, kind of pinpoint thing that you can sometimes get with some pieces. So it is a little bit different than what I think a lot of us are used to in that way. So that's something to keep in mind with the sound here too. Okay, so overall, I think it's like on its own, and when I listen to it just like on its own and just let it do its thing for a while, I enjoyed it. It's not particularly laid back. It is a little bit more energetic and forward. It has that slight U to it, so I think there will be a segment of listeners, of the listening population out there, that finds the upper treble a little bit fatiguing. So even though I think that the treble is fairly well controlled, like it doesn't really go sharp or sibilant very often, just that much presence, it might be a little bit too much for some, particularly if you're used to the way that Schiit has traditionally presented treble, like with the original Bifrost 2 or the Modius or something like that, where it's a little bit more laid back. It might be a little bit much for you in that regard. But I had fun listening to it, and it created a really engaging, enjoyable sound for me, you know, and it had a lot of the traits that I like about Schiit's house sound. Big soundstage with reasonably good holographic spatial presentation within it, lots of fun dynamics, some good low-end punch and rumble, okay, and pretty good timbre. I should say timbre is another strength here because like Schiit tends to be pretty strong in the timbre department, at least to my ear, and that made it into this unit as well. So let's come back and think about where this fits into the market and all of that. Come back to that question that I framed this whole review with, of like, is this the single-ended $300 option out there? And so let's talk some comparisons with other DACs in the market, and then we'll come back and I'll try to answer that question. So the first thing I want to compare to is the original Modius, also from Schiit here. I've had this unit for a while. It's well used. The name of the Modius here is starting to wear off a little bit, but this was one of the comparisons I did. This I don't think is any longer for sale. It was $200 US. Its replacement, the Modius E, I believe is $229. I have not heard the Modius E. I would like to. If anyone out there has one they're willing to send me for review, please do. Okay, so the Modius, again, this one has both single-ended and balanced outputs. It's a balanced DAC, and it is, like most of them, one of those DACs that sounds better from its balanced outputs here than it does its single-ended, as just about all DACs under $1,000 that are that way do, and many that are over $1,000 also do. Okay, so from comparing single-ended to single-ended, I could tell that, again, the more active, energetic, some might consider aggressive presentation of the Multibit 2 came out, whereas the Modius was more smooth, laid back, and a little bit more just kind of chill in its presentation. It also has the more pinpoint kind of imaging, where the sonic images on this one just sound a little bit wider, just a little bit bigger. The soundstage starts a little farther away from you with the Modius than it does with the Modi Multibit 2 as well. Okay, however, in time, I did realize that the Multibit 2 has more resolution, and it shows up particularly in the micro details. And it took me a while to tease this out. Because of the more active, energetic presentation of the Multibit 2, the Multibit 2 sounded like just a little bit, initially, came across as just a little bit sloppier and a little bit less controlled, because the more smooth nature of this one just made it sound a little bit more refined, at least initially to my ear. But the overall control on the Multibit 2 here is still better, and that shows up in that it gets sharp and sibilant in the treble, even less than this one does, even though this one comes across a little bit brighter because of that slightly added treble presence, where this one still maintains a slightly warmer sonic character. So that was one difference that came out. But then back to that control, even though the Multibit 2 was a little bit more active and energetic and kind of initially presented as just a little bit sloppy, in time what I realized is it was just a little bit more active and energetic and a little bit more forward in that. But it also brought out a lot more micro detail. Like room reverbs had more definition to them. Like you could hear a more clear second strike of a drum. Like you hear a hit on a drum, the initial hit on the drum skin itself, and then you could hear the reflection off the studio wall, and that reflection sounded a little bit more natural and well-defined, and like more of a drum reflection off of a wall from the Multibit 2 than it did from the Modius. Now that was from the single-ended output of the Modius. So what does the balanced output here, how does that compare switching to single-ended here? And that comparison gets a little bit trickier, because then you're throwing in the variable of whatever amp do you use. Is it as good from its single-ended input as it is from its balanced and all of that? That's a hard question to answer. The amps that I had on hand to try where I could switch between balanced and single-ended inputs would be the Lake People G111 Mark II, the Vio VT8, the Vioelectric HPA V281, and the i5 Pro iCAN Signature Edition. And on all three of those amps, it was very consistent that the Multibit 2 still outperformed the Modius in basically all the same ways that I just mentioned, but the gap closed a little bit. This was not as far ahead as the Modius when the Modius was used balanced, but it was still ahead, okay? It was still ahead. It was a little bit more of a challenge to get there because the output level is different. I mean, 4-volt output from the balanced output compared to a 2-volt from the single-ended output. I was constantly adjusting the potentiometers, but I eventually got to a close enough volume matching that I could tease out what I just said there. Okay. Another comparison that I want to do here that I'm sure people will ask about is the Geshelli Labs J2. I reviewed the J2 AKM edition. I think it was the AKM edition. I don't know, one of them. Okay, back in April of 2022. Maybe that one was the ESS, because I think that was right after the fire. That was probably the ESS version. Apologies. Okay, but I will link to it down below so you can go watch that too. I have not heard the Geshelli AKM version that I know of. The J2 at the time struck me as like probably the best all-around performing $300 DAC, because that one cost $300 when you put the Monero USB input on it there. And the J2 is also going to be able to decode with that USB module. It's going to be able to decode DSD and I think higher bit rates of PCM files, which I don't think really matters, but it might to you. Okay, The J2 is going to be, again, it's been a long time since I've heard it, but I'm pretty confident it's going to be less energetic and a little bit like smoother and a little bit more like probably sounding technically accurate, okay, than this one does. Where this one is a little bit more fun. We don't really care about measurements as much. We just want to create an engaging, enjoyable sound. The J2, while still engaging and enjoyable because it's an excellent DAC, is just a little bit more like accurate, if you will. It's going to have is a little bit smaller sound stage than this one. Not small, but just smaller than what the Schiit house sound produces. It's not going to be quite as dynamic, but it very well could be more resolving than this yet. I can't verify that by ear, but it would not surprise me if that was the case. Well, not by much. It's not going to be by a whole lot, okay? But it might be just a hair more resolving than this one. And again, it's going to have that more technically accurate sound if that's what you're after. The J2 is also a balanced DAC, where this is only single-ended, and the J2 is not immune from that fact that it does not perform as strongly from its single-ended output than it does from its balanced output. So single-ended versus single-ended, I would be fairly confident in saying the Multibit 2 here is the overall stronger performer. Okay, you'll still hear, you know, the intentional fun and coloration of the sound here as compared to the, again, the more like technically accurate J2. Okay, but this one would still have more resolution, a little bit sharper imaging separation, you know, that sort of thing going on with it. If you're, again, comparing single-ended output to single-ended output. Okay. Next comparison. I'll go ahead, I'm not going to hold this one up because it's plugged into my system over there and I've had it in for review for a while and I'm working on it, I promise. That is the Musician Draco R2R DAC. And again, I was comparing the single-ended output of that one to the single-ended output of the Multibit 2 here. And the Draco, for one thing, has a lower output level from its single-ended output. Like the Draco does not have variable output that I have found. I think it's just pretty constant, you know, output level, just like this one. No preamp or anything like that. But the Draco is quieter. It just doesn't have quite the output level that this one does. So I, again, had to be careful with volume matching and trying to figure all of that out, which I did. But the Draco, again, kind of like the Modius, is just a little bit smoother, a little bit more laid back in its sound, whether it's NOS or, because that one also has a NOS mode, or the burrito, or its own digital filter. Okay, the sound is, again, a little bit farther away, whereas the Multibit 2, it's up a little bit more in your face, close and personal. But the Draco did eventually show itself to, even from its single-ended output, have a little bit more overall resolution, a little bit more overall refinement, a more accurate sound imaging and separation, a little bit more holographic in its spatial presentation, in other words, and all of that. So, and then if you use the balanced output of the Draco into those other amps that I just mentioned, that gap gets bigger yet again, right? So this one is not quite catching, at least the Musician Draco, in that mid-fi tier. And the Draco, I think, is $750-ish. I'd have to go back and look. It's like $650, $700, $750, I think. Something like that, where this is only $300. So we do expect that one to be better. But again, single-ended to single-ended, it's just kind of barely better. It is noticeably better, but it's not a huge gap. So there you go. Keep that in mind. But if you use the balance output of the Draco, the gap widens rather significantly so. All right. Schiit's Bifrost 2, the /64 version here, which I also have a review of, which I will link to down below. Doing some of the same tests again. So single-ended output versus single-ended output. The Bifrost 2 sounded better than this. Like similar differences again to what I hear. Just more refinement, more accurate and holographic spatial presentation, even though the sound stages are roughly the same size. The Multibit 2, again, starts the soundstage a little bit closer, a little bit more in my face, whereas it's a little further away with the Bifrost 2. Okay, and then like just more resolution. And the difference from single-ended here to single-ended on the Bifrost is bigger in the Bifrost's favor than the difference from single-ended here to the Musician Draco. And then again, you plug in balanced, and balance for the Bifrost, and that gap widens a little bit again, although the gap there is not quite as big as the gap that was for the Musician Draco. So this was another finding that was interesting, because I was thinking when I reviewed the Bifrost 2/64 that its single-ended output was very close in performance to its balanced output. And they're not as close as I initially thought. But they are still closer than like the Musician Draco's difference is, right? And I'm not saying that the Draco's balanced out is better than the Bifrost 2's balance out. That, first of all, belongs in another video. It's not. I don't think that it is. It's just that the single-ended output quality of the Bifrost 2 is higher than the Draco's, and thus higher yet than the Multibit 2's. Okay. So those are the comparisons there. The only thing I don't think I covered yet was specifically the NOS mode on this guy. So I'll hit that real quick. And it's appropriate to talk about that after having just talked about the Bifrost 2, because this one also has the NOS mode in it. And the effect is similar using the Schiit's built-in digital filters compared to the non-oversampling modes of these two, because the effect was just very similar to my ear. The NOS mode on here is a little bit softer. That soundstage takes a little bit of a step back. It's a little bit less in my face, but I don't think it's quite as resolving. The soundstage narrows a little bit, and then the center image is pushed at me just slightly, so it's not as coherent a soundstage to my ear. So I didn't use the NOS mode very much because of that. I just didn't enjoy it as much, and I didn't think it sounded as good, which again, to me, is similar with what's going on here. But it is also here that I should drop the comment that I believe Schiit's NOS modes are intended to be used with external digital filters. So if you have a software playback system that you like an Audirvana or an HQ player or whatever that has a digital filter, I think Rune has some too, that has a digital filter, I would still, I would only use the NOS mode with one of those digital filters. Otherwise, use the in-house digital filters that are in there. Okay, that's my take on that. So, is there anything else I need to comment on here? The USB input is really good. I think it still sounds a little bit better if you get a high quality SPDIF connection. Like I was noticing for the comparisons that I just mentioned, I would use the twin coax SPDIF outputs from my Singer SU2 and like use coax versus coax input for all of those comparisons. I should have mentioned that earlier, but that's okay. Okay, that can sound really good. I think might be from the Singer, which is a high quality USB connection, might be a little bit better than the Unison USB on here, but the Unison USB, like using from my Surface Pro 4 laptop there, just still sounds really good. Okay, so it's still Schiit's Unison USB solution, to my ears, still remains one of the best, if not the best, USB implementation out there. Really, at least for built-in USB implementations, because it also is fairly resistant to noise, like system noise and all of that, which, like the Amanero on the Geshelli J2 didn't handle noise very well. The Unison does a little bit better, so that's something to keep in mind there as well. All right, now I think I've covered everything that I need to cover. So yeah, back to that question. Is this the $300, $400, $500, whatever? Is this the under $500 single-ended DAC we've been waiting for? It might be. It does sound very good. I enjoyed listening to it on just about every signal chain that I threw at it. It did a really solid job. It does not punch up quite as much as some may have hoped. Like I would have liked to have seen it catch the single-ended performance of the Draco, for example, or the SMSL VMV D1SE that I also have in for review, and I don't think it has quite caught those, which is a little bit unfortunate because had it done that, it would have been an automatic yes, just go buy this if you need a single-ended DAC under $1,000. But it's not quite at that level. But for a $300 piece, it is really solid and quite effective, I think. So if you have a tube amp like, say, the Bottlehead Crack or a Felix Echo, or like what's that X Duo, the TA27 or something like that, that's basically a dark voice, or you have a dark voice. Okay, and you want something that's a little bit better than entry level, but you need that single-ended and you like the small form factor, then yes, absolutely, give this one a look. Okay, so that I think is really kind of its place in the market. Okay, so overall solid, but it's not going to change the Earth's rotation because of how great it is. Okay, at the same time. So I am Wave Theory. These have been my thoughts on the Schiit Multibit 2 DAC. Please like this video if you haven't yet. Leave a comment down below. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't. Check out my PayPal where you can make a one-time donation to help support the channel, or check out my Patreon where you can join my Discord and talk to me and get early access to my videos and all of that. But for now, thanks for watching and enjoy the music.